Hi, I'm New World Now podcast host Kim Corbin. I recently had the opportunity to sit down and talk with author Roger Housden about his new book, 10 Poems for Difficult Times. I hope that you'll enjoy the interview. Your popular 10 poem series began in 2001 when 10 Poems to Change Your Life was published, and the last book until now was 10 Poems to Say Goodbye in 2012. So I'm curious what inspired you to add another book to the collection.
Well, the truth is President Trump inspired me to add another book to the poetry 10 Poems collection. So it was November 16, and I think probably like more than half of the country, I was walking around in a daze and stunned and despondent, and with the question that I'm sure was on many people's minds: what can I do? And feeling helpless, really. And as often has happened in my life with books and titles for books, even ideas, whole ideas for books, they happen when I'm walking. So, I was walking, actually I think the day or 2 days after the election, walking in the forest on Mount Tam, and just out of nowhere, 10 Poems for Difficult Times. I thought, again, am I going to do another 10 poems? Of course you are. This is so right, for these times and times ongoing. So with that title, that was it. I knew that was I was actually reflecting on doing something completely different in terms of my next book. But that just flew in from left field and landed on my shoulder, and no turning back.
Well, I'm glad that it came to you and that you followed through, because it's very timely.
Yeah.
Very timely. And you say in the book that poetry is profoundly necessary, especially in times of both personal and collective darkness and difficulty, and that reading or writing it is one thing that we can do to make a difference, and it's obviously how you make a difference. So can you tell us more about how poetry can make a difference?
Well, first of all, it can't stop wars. It can't stop people being angry with each other. It can't stop depression, at least in a collective sense. So what can poetry really do? There's so much to respond to in this, but poetry really speaks to our deep heart. And I think that when the truest, deepest thing inside of a human being is touched, something else is possible. Another way of seeing is possible. Another way of feeling becomes possible. And it's an individual experience. But there are times, like times of great difficulty, when poems and poetry in general suddenly leap onto the front page. And for example, in 9/11, in the weeks following 9/11 in New York City, I was there at the time, and walls along the streets were plastered with poems. The only thing people knew how to say anything or what to say was by either writing their own poem or by quoting a poem that in some way spoke to their feeling of the moment. Now, why is that? It's because poetry speaks an essential language. We use language all the time, all day long. We're using it right now. But poetry takes the very essence of language, condenses it into really the most concise form that is possible, and delivers it in that way. And when a great poem happens, It happens because that essence, if you like, speaks directly to the person reading it or hearing it. And they, in their own way, are awakened for a moment, even if for a moment, to the truth that is in the poem, which otherwise they may never have had words for.
Mm. Yeah. And how did you choose which 10 poems to include?
Yeah, that's always a challenge. You know, I mean, there's so many, of course, so many poems. By the way, I want to quote before we go on to that something, a couple of lines that are on a gravestone in New York State, that sum up, I think, the essence of what artists and poets in general offer the world and their value and place in the world. So, and by the way, this headstone, it's the headstone of a grave. It's on Long Island, actually. It's in the cemetery where Jackson Pollock is buried. And it says, artists and poets are the raw nerve ends of humanity. By themselves, they can do little to save humanity. Without them, there would be little worth saving. Mm. So I think that really speaks to that point. And to come back to your question that you just raised about which poems in particular, found their way into this book and how, it's because each one of these poems touched a raw nerve end in me and awoke something in me, really. So these poems are not just soothing, they are, but they're also awakening, for me at least, and I hope for others. They're awakening in the sense of returning me, even if for a moment, to my essential humanity. Even in the midst of all the difficulties that we're both individually and collectively engaged in. So, awakening to that essential humanity, we see things differently. So, some of these poems I knew, and I'd known for a long time. Some of them just came in out of nowhere that I'd never heard of before. For example, the very first one in the book, Good Bones. That's by a poet, Maggie Smith from Ohio, who wasn't well known at all. I didn't know her, but her poem came to the light of day just a few days after a massacre in Orlando where 49 people were killed. And this poem, Good Bones, was published in a very small magazine around the same time. But someone picked it up and put it on the web, social media, and it just went viral all over the world, not just in America. And it did so because it really does speak to this impossible situation of being human, which is, we live in a world that is both utterly savage and utterly beautiful, all at the same time. So it's not first one then the other. If we're able to look, the savagery and the beauty actually coexist in us right now, and in everyone and in all cultures. And what to do? Well, her poem responds to that question, what to do, and it's more in terms of an attitude or an insight than any particular activity. So, I'd love to read it to you. Can I?
I would love that.
The poem Good Bones by Maggie Smith. Life is short, though I keep this from my children. Life is short, and I've shortened mine in 1,000 delicious, ill-advised ways. 1,000 deliciously ill-advised ways that I'll keep from my children. The world is at least 50% terrible. And that's a conservative estimate. Though I keep this from my children. For every bird, there is a stone thrown at a bird. For every loved child, a child broken, bagged, sunk in a lake. Life is short, and the world is at least half terrible, and for every kind stranger, there is one who would break you. Though I keep this from my children, I am trying to sell them the world. Any decent realtor walking you through a real shithole chirps on about good bones. This place could be beautiful, right? You could make this place beautiful. So she wrote that sitting one afternoon in Starbucks for her children, because like so many parents, she's faced with the question, how do I tell the truth to my children about this world, and yet how do I protect them from all the dangers and all the terrible things that are happening? How do I do both? And so out of that question that she was asking herself, this poem arrived, on the coffee table. And it's now, everywhere. It's also the first poem in this book.
Yeah.